Hello, everyone, and welcome to the World Series of Board Gaming's strategy series, How to Win series. We're going to teach you how to come out on top in the Lost Ruins of Arnak. If you missed it, we've been doing one of these for all of the games at WSBG. In case you want to up your game just a little bit and give yourself the competitive edge when you come to the World Series of Board Gaming in September. The World Series of Board Gaming, WSBG, is an event that happens every September, currently at the Horseshoe Casino in Las Vegas. You get the glitz and the glam of Vegas. You can potentially win yourself a championship ring valued at over $2,500. These are like Super Bowl style rings. They're so cool. And you can also have the chance to take home $25,000 as the grand prize and be crowned the world's best all-around board gamer. We have 2 winners so far, and maybe you could be the third. Tickets are available at WSBGVegas.com. You can check that out in the link below, tell you everything you need to know about the event, or of course, you can always ask me. I'm Chris George, and I'm happy to guide you along your board gaming journey. But today we're talking about the Lost Ruins of Arnak and the top 5 tips on how to get better and how to improve. Lost Ruins of Arnak, which shot onto the scene in 2020 and is currently number 27 on Board Game Geek. This is a new addition to our lineup, and I'm so excited to talk about it because I think it's a great addition. This and Dune Imperium, which is also in the event, they often get compared with each other. And while I think you need similar skills in terms of worker placement and evaluating what actions are going to be the most efficient for yourself, I think that the comparisons between the two are completely overblown. Lost Ruins of Arnak is its own unique, beautiful beast of a game. And if you don't recognize these differences, then you're already one step behind our future champion. And one thing that's really important to recognize in this game is this picture right here. This is our tip number 5, recognizing the importance of the temple track. Right here we can see an image of the bird temple track. The snake temple track is on the back. And we'll talk about those differences in play and how they should shape your play depending upon what side of the board you are. That's tip number 4. But tip number 5 is to really not neglect this temple track. When this game might have been pitched to you, you might have been told that it was deck building and worker placement. And so with that descriptor, it would be okay for you to assume that most of the action happens upon this main board. However, the temple track is the way that you can really chain resources together. This is a game more about resource management, about squeezing the most resources as possible in the limited time that you have. You only have 5 rounds to get a winning score, to get that score close to 70 or 80. That's the number you want to shoot for. And it is the temple track that gives you these additional ways of getting resources and getting a whole bunch of points. If you know that the final score is kind of in that higher 70 to 80 range, getting to the top of the temple track represents over 25% of your final score. And this is a thing that will snowball. This is a thing that if you don't invest in and don't keep on climbing the ladder, you won't be turning in those resources into different resources and into points in a way that your competitors will be. So really, if you find yourself, you're new to the game, you're confused about what to focus on first, just focus on the temple track. Focus on pushing up the temple track and trying to get things that will enable you to do that. That's a good area of focus to help kind of hone your view. And speaking of the temple tracks, it's very important to know the differences between the snake temple and the bird temple. We have both up on the screen right now, the bird temple being the one to my left. And if you can see, we'll punch in a little bit, you can see the rewards for the bird temple all seem to be either based around assistance or based around compasses. And when we move over to the snake temple, you can see there's a much larger variation in what you get from the tracks. In fact, you don't get any compasses whatsoever. And so knowing the side of the board that you're playing on, that also should help you realize that exploration is going to be a lot harder to do over on the snake temple. The snake temple encourages more of that deck building aspect, whereas the bird temple encourages more of that exploration and worker placement aspect. Of course, you need a beautiful meld of both in both boards, but as a touchstone, This is important to realize when you're framing your strategy and when you're prioritizing what you're going to go for, and when you're even considering how many of these individual spaces will get unlocked. The Bird Temple having a very standard car and boat section, whereas on the Snake Temple, you'll have 3 cars, 3 boats, 1 boot, and 1 airplane, and then a mixture up top as well. You're losing that flexibility. You're losing the ease at which you can explore and even place in these spots, which again encourages more of that deck building aspect and more of that card cycling and card draw. Getting those fear cards out of your deck and making sure that you can capitalize on the good cards that you've created. Both temple tracks are equally still important, but it's how you move up them which dictates how your game will proceed that you need to be aware of as you progress through the game. Now, speaking of the Bird Temple, tip number 3 is to try to get your assistants as early as possible. Of course, like all things, don't do this to the detriment of your strategy, but this is particularly noteworthy on the Bird Temple because the first 4 sections of the board, when you move your book up the temple track or your journal up the temple track, they allow you to get these assistants. And these assistants are hugely powerful. They're that constant source of resources where you don't have to expend a card slot in your hand or expend a worker to go get them. They can provide you such incredible value, and their value decreases the fewer rounds there are remaining, because then you have less time to activate it. If you were to get this person who had a compass in round 1, let's say, you've essentially earned yourself 5 compasses. If you get that same person in round 3, they're only worth 3 compasses. Now, presuming you'll upgrade them at some point, so really the math is slightly higher, but you understand what I'm saying, I'm sure. With these assistants, you can generally go one of 2 ways. For example, on the Bird Temple, I know I'm getting a lot of compasses as I move up the track, and so am I going to get more compasses, or am I going to opt for something that could get me coins instead and sort of flesh out the deck building portion? That's something to consider. One of the best assistants out there, in my opinion, is one that you may not think. It's actually one that doesn't give you something for free. You have to spend a coin on it, but you can essentially turn a coin into an arrowhead and then eventually turn a coin into a ruby, which the normal way to do that is through the basic action of also discarding a card to do this. Now your assistant lets you redo this over and over again. That's one of my personal favorites because, again, I focus quite a lot on research tracks, and focusing on research tracks and also focusing on taking out some guardians at some point. They will require these resources. You can't subsist just on compasses and gold coins, but you have to find a balance between the 2. However, getting the assistance early is so key to help ramping up that engine. 5 rounds is a really, really short time. This game goes quickly. And if you're not using your resources every round to help propel you further and further, to help get that engine ramping up even more, you're going to fall behind. So getting a little bit more flexibility and eking out a couple extra resources makes a huge difference in this game, especially on that double turn when you've already used your assistant and then you upgrade them to the gold side and get to use them again. Feels really good. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4 has to deal with opening moves. I've been playing a lot on Board Game Arena recently in order to prepare for this video, and especially on the Bird Temple, there's essentially 2 opening moves. You can go get an arrowhead, or you can go get compasses. The arrowhead gives you the ability to move up along the track, over here with the compass and the arrow, moving up the track, and then potentially getting that assistant, and then the compasses allow you to explore a little bit more, hoping to luck into something that will yield you a bunch of resources on your next move. But without getting too far in the weeds, the thing that I will really caution you, because your resources need to be spent so economically and so effectively, the thing I'll caution you on is getting too tunnel vision on what that opening move means, that you ignore the priority of actions. And maybe this section should be called priority of actions. This is something that I feel many board gamers have as a skill set, but it bears repeating. Your opening move will determine basically everything else that you get to do in Lost Ruins of Arnak, at least for round 1, right? If you go for this research icon right here, you're telegraphing, okay, I'm going up the research track. I'm getting my assistant this round. Well, Chris said it was a good idea. It was Point number 3, I gotta do it. Likely you're going to want to get a red gem somehow. Whether it's getting additional compasses and trying to explore and then using the idol that you pick up to convert into a gem, that's a possibility. But really mapping out your next steps is super important because depending upon the number of people around the table, you're going to lose out on the other options. I personally put a lot of stock into the assistance, and so I like to go for that research track right away, but it's not always the best option. Playing with those opening moves, identifying when you need to abandon your worker placement spots so that you can have first grab at the cards, a whole bunch of stuff goes into play in deciding that. And actually, there's a really, really great Board Game Geek article that somebody wrote that I'll link in the description below if you want to talk more about opening moves. But understanding the implications of that, I wanted to shout that out as a really important tip to consider because it sets the standard for your game. And remembering that what you do with your first move telegraphs to your opponents what you're going to do with your second move. I think that's a salient point to put out there. A clever opponent will know that if you're doing this one thing, you're going for another thing, and will then decide if they're going to pursue an optimal path or just block you and give you the better option, I guess. And finally, talking about these opening moves, talking about the placements, all of this changes based upon player count. Depending upon the structure of the tournament, you might have to play at a number of different player counts, so it's best to get familiar with the changes and how they interact with each other. And one of the largest changes that I've noted is the change of Guardians, and more specifically, having the resources available to kill the Guardians or to leave them open for somebody else to kill. At first glance at this game, Guardians feel like they are worth a lot of points. They're worth 5 points. That feels like an enormous amount. And if you don't defeat them, you also take a fear card, so it's a negative point. So essentially it's worth 6 points for defeating a Guardian right on your turn as you arrive there. But the benefits of defeating a Guardian become a little bit less effective at a higher player count. In a 2-player game, it's essentially a 10-point swing, right? Because if I don't complete this Guardian, my opponent might complete the Guardian, and then I'll be very much behind. In a larger game, I see that swing being less important. When you think about it, the Guardians only get you that one-time bonus, right? You get 5 points, and you get a one-time bonus, and you don't have a fear card. But there's ways of trashing fear. There's ways of cycling through your deck. And investing in a relic or an additional step on the research track, which might eventually get you a free relic or free resources or a number of different free things, the benefits to spending your time investing in those things rather than going all out and stressing about killing Guardians right away is pretty significant. I think Guardians get a lot of weight put upon them, and I don't necessarily think that they are the be-all and end-all of strategy, especially if you get those card engines going, because the little numbers count up, right? So I think the idea here is to know when your resources are best spent killing that Guardian for those points and when they can be used to, again, create your engine. You can also think of the turn order structure in terms of how likely are you going to get back to that spot. Do you want to incentivize people going to this spot, or do you want to sort of push them away? If we look at these Guardians that have come up, or actually let's get to a picture of all the Guardians. I think I saw those as we went through. I feel like in a 4-player game, there's so much more turnover and things going on than in a 2-player game that you're going to see more Guardians left on the board than you would in a 2-player game. I think that's okay if you need to make that choice. You don't have to scramble as much to complete those things because of how the swings work and because of the efficacy of spending your resources for something that you may not need. It's a tough call. 2 compasses and an arrowhead gets you 1 free card. So maybe you save a compass, maybe you save a coin, but you still have to spend a single resource in sort of one of the better special resources, whereas instead you can invest that in moving up the track, ramping up your engine, racing the other players, rather than frantically trying to get rid of all your aces in your sleeve to deal with these Guardians. So there you go. That's the 5 tips, the 5 strategy tips on how to win Lost Ruins of Arnak. There's still a lot more that I want to talk about and I want to distill, but I think that's a good groundwork to get you started. Lost Ruins is a complex game. It's a really tight game. It's a game that can be very frustrating to get your engine going, but then when it starts to cook and when you start to grasp the intricacies, it really, really sings. There's a reason why a ton of people love it. But hopefully that's enough to get you started on your strategy journey in Lost Ruins of Arnak. Drop your own tips down below on what your best strategy tips are, how you've achieved success, what your epic Lost Ruins of Arnak victories were. And if you knew all these tips and more, well then hey, you might be a great candidate to participate in the World Series of Board Gaming and be our first Lost Ruins of Arnak world champion. The glory is yours for the taking. You just need to buy a ticket. Go to WSBGVegas.com for all the details on how to have one of the most fun board gaming events of your year. Seriously, I could gush on and on about all the stuff that we got going on. I'm very, very excited about where this event is growing to, and I love seeing all of our competitors and all the board gamers being highlighted and being brought forward into the spotlight. And if you're watching this, it could also be you. So thanks everybody for watching. My name's Chris George, and on behalf of all of us here at WSBG Vegas, what are you waiting for? It's time to get in the game.